Three very creepy horror incident in real-life horror stories. It was one of those rare, still nights in the town of Rosebrook, a small, sleepy place tucked away from the busy world. The kind of place where people knew each other's names, and the air was always thick with quiet. Life here moved slowly. The streets were empty, the trees barely swaying, and the only sounds that could be heard were the occasional chirps of crickets or the rustling of leaves. Melina had moved here recently. She needed peace, she needed space. After years of city life, she just wanted somewhere she could breathe, away from the chaos. And she found it. A small, secluded cottage just outside of town. Old, but comfortable. Weathered, but full of character. The kind of place that whispered stories if you listened close enough. After a long day of unpacking, she decided to take a walk through the nearby woods. She needed to clear her head, to relax. It was just a short walk. Nothing too fancy, but enough to help her feel grounded again. The night air was cool as she stepped outside, her boots crunching on the gravel path. Above her, the stars shone like diamonds in the dark sky. There was a slight chill in the air, but nothing too unsettling. The trees stretched tall above her, their branches swaying gently in the wind. But something felt different tonight. She couldn't place it at first, but it was there. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the trees, which usually whispered in the wind, seemed to hold their breath. Melina stopped, her foot halfway through a step, as the odd sensation crawled up her spine. A shiver. Was that something? She stood there for a moment, listening. But no, there was nothing. Nothing except the silence. That strange, thick silence that seemed to be pressing down on her chest. She looked behind her. The cottage was far off now, a small silhouette against the horizon. She was alone, and yet she didn't feel it. Not completely. Her steps quickened, and she kept moving forward, trying to shake off the unease. The path ahead of her was barely visible in the low light, but she could make out the faint outline of the trees. The further she walked, the more she felt that something was wrong. Then, she saw it. A light. A soft, flickering light. It wasn't the kind of light that belonged to a campfire or a lantern. It wasn't warm. It was pale, almost ethereal, and it hovered just above the ground. Melina's breath caught in her throat. She squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It flickered again, just a few feet in front of her. What the hell is that? Her heart was pounding now, but her feet moved forward, drawn toward the strange glow. Maybe it's an animal, she thought. A reflective surface? But no, something in her gut told her this wasn't normal. As she stepped closer, the light blinked out of sight. Her breath hitched. Wait. She stopped, her mind racing. Was it moving? Yes, it was. The light flickered again, farther away this time, just beyond the next set of trees, and then it was gone. No, no, no. A wave of panic washed over her, but she fought it back. It's just your mind playing tricks on you, Melina. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her. And then, there it was. Figures, 2 of them. Tall, thin shapes standing in the darkness. The light flickered faintly between them. No one should be out here. Not at this hour. Melina's chest tightened as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But they were there. Watching her. She could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on her. Her breath was shallow. Her heart was thudding so loud she was sure they could hear it. Do they see me? She wanted to scream, to shout, but her throat closed up. No words came out. She couldn't even move. Her feet were stuck to the ground. One of them shifted. It was slow, deliberate, a step forward, just one. But it was enough to send a jolt of fear straight through her body. Her legs gave way, and suddenly she was running. She didn't think. She didn't stop to look. She just ran. Faster. Faster. the sound of her heart pounding in her ears, her feet pounding against the forest floor. Don't look back. Don't look back. But the urge was too strong. She had to. So she glanced over her shoulder. They were still there, watching. But now they were moving. Slowly. Gently. Almost like they were following her, keeping pace. She turned her head back toward the path ahead of her, tears starting to sting her eyes. I have to get back. I have to get home. Her breath was coming in ragged gasps now, the air thick in her lungs. She pushed herself harder, not caring about the branches scratching at her arms, not caring about anything but getting back to the safety of her cottage. But the woods had changed. The path didn't look the same. The trees seemed taller, more twisted. The air was colder now, so much colder. She couldn't see the familiar landmarks that she had passed earlier. Wasn't that tree just to the left? Why is it gone now? The silence felt louder now, suffocating her. The world around her had shifted. Everything was wrong. She didn't know where she was anymore. The trees were closing in, pressing in on her like a dark, suffocating wall. And then she heard it. A whisper. Soft at first. A low, barely audible sound. It was her name. Melina. She froze, her body tensed. Number no. This is not real. The whisper came again, closer this time. Melina. It was so clear, so unmistakable. It was coming from behind her, from the direction she had just run from. She didn't want to turn, but she had to. She had no choice. Slowly, she turned around. There, just behind her, standing in the shadows, were the figures. They weren't standing still anymore. They were walking toward her, her legs buckled beneath her. She fell to her knees, unable to move. Please. No. The whisper came again, right beside her ear. Come to us. In a desperate, frenzied panic, Melina scrambled to her feet and bolted toward the clearing ahead, her heart in her throat, her mind racing, her body barely able to keep up. But the light, those figures, they weren't far behind. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the light was gone. The figures disappeared into the dark, as if they had never been there at all. The woods fell silent once more, and Melina was left standing there, gasping for air, her heart racing, her legs trembling beneath her. She could still feel their presence, as though they were still out there, watching her, waiting. She stumbled back to her cottage. The door slammed shut behind her as she locked it, breathing hard. Her mind was spinning. What was that? What did I just see? But then, as she sank to the floor, trying to calm her racing heart, she heard it again. That whisper. Software clear, right outside her window. Melina. She froze, and she knew, deep down, that it would never stop. This is Most Disturbing Horror Incident in Real Life Horror Story number 2. I used to think I was pretty rational. I always scoffed at ghost stories, laughed at horror films. I mean, they're just stories, right? Nothing more than fictional scares meant to entertain. The idea of a haunted house? Pure nonsense. I never believed in such things. I considered myself immune to the creepy feelings most people had in old buildings. That was until I moved into that house. It was a small, weathered place on the outskirts of a quiet little town. I had just gotten a new job, one that was far enough away from the chaos of city life to make me feel like I could finally breathe. The house was cheap. Perfect, really. A little rundown, but it had character. The kind of charm you find in places that have lived through many lifetimes. I didn't mind the creaky floors or the odd noises. Old houses make noise, right? They just do. It was peaceful at first, but it wasn't long before I realized something was off. The first night I heard it, I was in the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me as I brushed my teeth. The faucet ran, its sound filling the silence. But then, there it was, a faint whisper. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the walls. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, staring at the mirror. I I turned off the tap. The house was still. Too still. I shook it off. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. It was nothing. The second night, the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a voice. A clear voice. Low, urgent. It seemed to hum in the corners of the room, just out of reach. A whisper on the air. I couldn't make out the words at first. But then, the words came through, faint but sharp. Help me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled. I turned off the lights, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just the wind, or pipes, or anything but what my gut was telling me. But the next night, it happened again. A voice. Closer this time. Help me, it said, almost pleading. I jumped up, scanning the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't have. The sound, that voice, was real. And it wanted something. Needed something. I had to know what it was. The following night, I couldn't sleep. The whispering had turned into footsteps. Slow, measured, like someone was walking in the hallway just outside my room. I would hear them in the dead of night, always just out of sight. Soft taps on the wood floor, then silence. More silence than I'd ever felt before. It crept under my skin. By then, I started doubting my sanity. I called my mom. She listened patiently as I babbled about the strange noises, about the footsteps. I told her how I couldn't sleep, how I knew there was something in the house. "Lilara, you're just stressed," she said, calm but firm. "It's an old house. There's bound to be sounds. You're just imagining it." But I knew better. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. The worst came on a stormy night. I was in bed curled up under the covers, trying to block out the howling wind and the rain beating against the windows. I could still hear the faint whisper, a murmur under the storm. I rolled over, pulling the blankets over my head, willing it to stop. But then it came again. This time, louder, clearer. "Help me, please." I shot out of bed, heart racing, as if I had been physically jolted awake. The voice was coming from the hallway, as though someone was right there just beyond the door. I stood in the middle of my room, my breath shallow, panic bubbling up in my chest. It wasn't the wind this time. It was a voice, a real voice, pleading for help. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone, dialing my mom in a panic. "Mom," I gasped. I can't do this. I'm hearing things. There's something here. Please." But before she could respond, I heard it again. The voice, now unmistakable. "Help me." This time it was coming from upstairs. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared up the stairs, my hand gripping the phone like it might somehow protect me. I hesitated, breathless. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to go up there. But the voice, it called again. "Help me, Lilara." I froze. This wasn't my imagination anymore. This wasn't something I could explain away. Something was there, and it wasn't going to stop until I answered. I felt sick, but my feet moved before my mind could catch up. I climbed the stairs slowly, one creak after another, the air growing colder with each step. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, each breath a struggle. The attic door at the end of the hall seemed to mock me. I could feel the weight of something waiting behind it, watching me. I reached for the doorknob, my hands slick with sweat. The door groaned as I turned it, and I hesitated on the threshold. The air in the attic was thick with dust, heavy, almost suffocating. The flashlight in my hand flickered, casting wild shadows across the floor. And then, in the corner of the attic, I saw it. A figure. A silhouette barely visible in the darkness. It stepped forward and I gasped. It was a woman, her face pale as if drained of color, her clothes ragged, her hair hanging in wild, unkempt strands. Her eyes, those eyes, were wide open, empty, as if she were staring straight through me, and her lips, they moved. "Help me," she whispered. I couldn't breathe. My legs went numb, my mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The shadows seemed to wrap around me, holding me in place, trapping me there. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. The woman took a step closer. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was paralyzed. "I am trapped," she hissed, her voice distorted. "You are going to help me." The moment the words left her lips, I bolted. I shoved against the door, finally forcing it open, tumbling out into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs, through the house, out the door. The rain soaked me, but I didn't care. I didn't stop running until I reached the town, until I couldn't hear the house anymore. I never went back. The house on the hill wasn't just old. It wasn't just creaky. It wasn't just a place full of strange sounds and eerie whispers. It was alive. A presence. It wanted me to listen, to hear it. And when it chooses you, it doesn't let you go. Not until it gets what it wants. This is very unsettling. Horror incident in real life horror story number 3. It was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. Dalila and her fiancé Lucas had spent months dreaming of a life away from the city, of finding a peaceful place to finally start their new chapter together. They had searched for weeks, exploring one rundown house after another, until finally they found it. An old farmhouse, nestled in the countryside, surrounded by trees and silence. The house was old, yes, and definitely seen better days, but there was something about it that captured Dalila's heart. It had character, history. It needed work, but Dalila saw potential in its worn-down walls. She saw the future she'd always wanted, quiet, peaceful, away from the chaos of the world. So, they packed up, left the bustling city, and moved into the farmhouse, excited about their new life. But what Dalila didn't realize was that sometimes a new start comes with a cost, and this one, it would cost her sanity. From the very first night, there was something off, something wrong. At first it was subtle, a sound in the distance, a creak in the floorboards. The house was old, after all, and old houses had a way of settling, right? But then, as the days went by, it became impossible to ignore. Dalila had just finished unpacking the last of the boxes in the living room when it started. A soft whisper, barely audible. She paused, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up as she looked around. "Dalila." It was as though someone was whispering her name right there in the room with her. But when she turned around, there was no one there. Her heartbeat quickened. Was she imagining it? Was she just exhausted from the move? But no, the whispers didn't stop. Every night after that, they grew louder, clearer. Dalila. It wasn't just in her head. She could hear it unmistakably, as if someone was right next to her, breathing in her ear. She started to feel the presence of something watching her, following her. No matter where she went, the whispers seemed to follow. One evening, after unpacking boxes in the dim light of the living room, she sat down to rest. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with something she couldn't quite place. She tried to ignore it, sipping her tea, when there it was again. "Dalila." She froze. She could hear the whispers unmistakable, coming from the walls. She jumped up, her heart hammering in her chest, looking around the room, expecting to see Lucas. "Lucas!" she called, her voice trembling. Her fiancé appeared from the kitchen, a worried look on his face. "What's wrong?" I keep hearing things, whispering, in the walls. It's like someone's calling my name." He looked at her, concerned but chuckling softly. "Dalila, it's just an old house. It's probably the wind or the pipes. Nothing to worry about." Dalila wanted to believe him. She really did. But as he turned and walked back into the kitchen, the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, clearer. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, murmuring secrets just out of reach. That night, Dalila couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, unable to escape the voices in her mind, until finally, when the darkness felt suffocating, she heard it again. A voice so clear it chilled her to the bone. Dalila. Her blood ran cold. She was awake. She wasn't dreaming. But it wasn't just a whisper anymore. This voice was different. It was a command. Get out. Dalila's heart leaped into her throat. The air in the room seemed to freeze around her. Her breath caught. What was happening? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the light, turning it on, illuminating the room, but nothing. The voice didn't stop. Dalila. Get out. Her chest tightened. Panic rose inside her. She didn't know what was real anymore. Was she losing her mind? Or was there something truly wrong with this house? Before she could gather her thoughts, she heard a loud crash from downstairs. Lucas. She leapt out of bed, her legs shaky beneath her. Her heart raced as she bolted toward the stairs. The house was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. She descended the staircase, her feet pounding against the old wood. The living room was still and dark, but there was no sign of Lucas. She stumbled into the room, her eyes darting from corner to corner. Nothing. No trace of him. And yet, she could hear it. The unmistakable sound of something scraping against the walls just out of sight. The house groaned in response, as if someone, was trying to communicate with her. The whispers were louder now, clearer. Leave. The voice wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a command. Cold, clear, unmistakable. Dalila's breath came in shallow gasps. The air felt thick with an oppressive force. Something was here. Something wasn't right. She tried to call for Lucas, her voice cracking in fear, but it was swallowed by the suffocating silence of the room. In that instant, the door slammed open by itself. Dalila froze, eyes wide with terror. The door had just opened. It swung wide, as though someone was standing there, pushing it open. But there was no one. With trembling hands, she rushed to the door, desperate to get out. But the door wouldn't open. The knob twisted in her hand, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, the whispers louder. She could feel something closing in on her, suffocating her. The laughter came then, low, dark, mocking. She stumbled back, her legs unsteady as the walls seemed to close in around her. The door opened, as if on cue. Dalila didn't think. She ran. She didn't even glance back. She didn't care to see the house behind her, or whether Lucas was still there. The whispers were relentless, closing in on her, but she couldn't stop. She ran, into the cold, dark night, away from the house, away from whatever was haunting it. But as she ran, she could hear it still. The whispers, still calling her name, still beckoning. Dalila. She didn't stop, and she never went back. The house was waiting, always waiting.